Nothing about the way we live is normal. Community or the lack thereof, the nuclear family structure, capitalism, the way we work, especially and particularly the way we work, which I will be focusing on in this video, none of it is normal and contributes to the high rates of depression, hopelessness, the loneliness epidemic, and the awakening, palpable sense of anger many are feeling. And of course, because this is America, it can all be tied back to slavery. Aloha, beautiful humans. Welcome to my channel if you are new here. Welcome back if we've been locked in. My name is Sasha, and today we're going to be talking about return to in-office work and how it's not about work at all. It is about control and the parallels of how we work in the modern day, how it can be tied back to American chattel slavery. The smear campaign against telework and work-life balance has been very effective, and the return to work / return to office agenda is pretty much complete at this point. And you can even hear it in the language, return to work, as if people working remote or teleworking or working from home, as if they weren't working at all or their efforts were not regarded as real work. With the new administration coming through like a freaking hurricane and eradicating decades of change via DEI and remote work, private companies will very likely follow suit, especially those who may be on the receiving end of any federal funding. And if they feel that funding is at risk, it will make them fall in line, which means millions of Americans will be dragged back to intolerant, inflexible work environments to keep the capitalism machine going. When I say none of this is normal, the way we work, we were not meant to live this way. And when we look at the way we work in America, it is very easy to see the parallels to American slavery as far as the way our days are structured. The goal of most businesses, obviously, is to make money by spending the least amount of money. So while the workforce may not be comprised of enslaved people or indentured servants in the modern era, the principles of early American capitalism in the form of chattel slavery remain present. Let's talk about office buildings and the way they're structured. So on plantations, work was often sunup to sundown, with small breaks afforded to the enslaved for the one meal they were allowed during the day, two if they were lucky. When we look at modern day office hours, quote unquote, in America, they are typically from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Some places start at 8 and then you can end at 4, but for the most part, it's that 8/9 a.m. to 5 p.m. structure. But the day for many begins long before that. Modern day commutes are a fresh hellscape, with the average American spending 26.8 minutes one-way commuting. When you do the math, that's about an hour a day, which for many, especially those who are living in major cities where train systems aren't as developed, or it's inconvenient in some way or another due to parking, the way the trains are run, the safety of the trains, etc., etc. These commutes in total, not just one way, but they can shoot up to well past an hour. And all of this is unpaid. We are up before the sun rises to get to the office, then return home as the sun is going down. Our entire days are spent on modern day plantations that are now office buildings or campuses, quote unquote, which a lot of companies now call their buildings to make it seem more hip. Looking at the structure of work, at least office environments, the structure of how it is set up mirrors plantations in the form of managers as overseers, whose management style parallels one another. Effective managers are leaders who lead by example and imbue in their teams a sense of self-governance and confidence, trusting they have a competent team around them to do the work they were hired to do and don't necessarily need to oversee every little thing they do. Return to in-office work, however, reflects the management style of the vast majority of managers, which parallels to that of overseers in the form of micromanagement. If you're lucky, you have a great management team. Many people, however, unfortunately do not have the privilege of having a manager who leads by example, who trusts the teams around them. Many people instead have managers who do not at all lead by example, but instead dictate by giving instructions, then they control every single aspect of a project, situation, or a task down to minor details, giving the illusion that work is being done and they are effective in their role, therefore necessary to the hierarchy. And that work can only be done effectively where they can see you or come over to you and hover as you would see with an overseer on a plantation. Think for yourself right now. Think about your manager. Do they constantly ask for updates, ask to be CC'd on every single email, constantly hover or spend an unnecessary amount of time at your desk? Do they call for meetings that absolutely could be emails? Do they focus on minute, unimportant details and limit your access to resources, demand unrealistic quotas, or nitpick at every little thing? If you answered yes to 3 or more of those, congratulations. You do not have a manager. You have an overseer, and my sincere apologies because it is the most ineffective form of leadership. But I honestly think it is by design to give these people the illusion that they're actively contributing to the company, to the business's end, and to keep themselves employed by creating roadblocks for the very teams and people they are supposed to be managing and leading. Another example of the way in which we work and a lot of office environments and management structures can be tied back to plantations, back to slavery, is think about rewards and punishment in the forms of incentives to performance. I want to be very clear that no one, at least hopefully, no one in any office environment in the modern day is being subjected to extreme violence. Punitive systems have absolutely evolved in the modern day workplace to incentivize and drive max production and effort. There is zero threat of physical violence. However, there is the threat of being fired and the loss of income, which is absolutely devastating in our modern economy where many are living paycheck to paycheck, and the average job search can take about 21 weeks. So when you think about that, can you yourself afford right now to be out of work for 5 months? The answer is probably no. And that's just the average. For many, that search for a job can take so much longer. When you think about in-office work, another way we incentivize risk and reward is in the form of raises and performance improvement plan, PIPs. And these are modern day ways in the office we see that can be drawn back to performance management on plantations, where even though we are not experiencing physical violence, the violence nowadays is mental with the palpable financial crisis we find ourselves in with people living paycheck to paycheck. That violence is now more mental than physical, but violence is still violence. And that mental violence, that fear of losing one's employment, living paycheck to paycheck, wondering how you're going to put food on your table and keep a roof over your head, that mental violence, it can oftentimes, in some situations, be even more effective than the actual use of physical violence. And that threat of violence, it can often be even more effective than the actual use of violence. None of this is normal. And I feel like a lot of people know it is not normal, but we are stuck on this rat wheel of capitalism that makes it so people are compliant, complacent, and they fall in line because the threat of what they have to lose, it's so much more palpable than the hope of what they have to gain by changing these systems. The way we live leaves zero room for any work-life balance, and this is absolutely by design, as the goal is to feed the ever-growing capitalism machine and keep it going. And the frustrating part is it doesn't have to be this way. You know, we learned this and we saw it over COVID. We could and did give people options. And yes, that option was out of necessity, but not only did people survive, many people thrived, and telework proved not only to be effective, but more people found themselves more productive in home working environments, in remote work environments, and teleworking environments than they often found themselves in the office. So you may wonder, like I've been wondering anyways, and I know many are wondering, so why this push for return to the office then? Well, obviously capitalism, you know. I feel like so many things, if we took it just, we don't even have to look that deep under the surface. So many things can be tied back to capitalism. You know, the leases to these office buildings that sat empty were a waste of money. The egos of micromanaging modern day overseers, aka managers, could not be stoked when they couldn't effectively harass their employees. You know, some people can't stand their families and hated being at home. But more important, I think there was a sense of jealousy and envy for those who didn't have the option to work remote, along with this growing polarization between blue collar work that is often associated nowadays with the right wing versus white collar work that is associated with the left, more liberal, and therefore not regarded as quote real unquote work. And I shouldn't say more importantly, because I think the optics, while that is the optics of telework, the reality of it, the leasing for the office buildings, the egos of these micromanaging managers and people who really did not want to be at home with their families, I think that those feelings were more tangible and more effective and impactful as to the reasons why behind this push for in-office work, people returning back to the office. However, the optics of telework and how increasingly polarized it has become, I think that has informed the conversation around telework and those feelings of jealousy and envy. That's what we see when we see people on social media and TikTok and in some forms of mainstream media, how they talk about telework. I think those personal feelings are definitely driving the conversation, even though the real push was capitalism and keeping the capitalism machine going. But if we take it back to the optics and what is regarded as real work, quote unquote, there's this characterization of what counts as what is regarded as real work. A lot of people have it in their heads that the only way work counts is if it looks a certain way or if it is being done in a particular environment. And people's rigidity, their intolerance, and their ignorance have made them hesitant to change or refusing to accept that the world is ever changing all around them. And just because something has been done one way for a very long amount of time doesn't mean that is the way it has to be done forever. It doesn't mean we can't reevaluate it and make it better, which is what remote work did, which is what telework did. It made a lot of work environments better for people, the way people worked, and created that work-life balance that benefited so many and often made them more productive at home in their remote work environments than they were in the physical office itself. And you know what? I get it. We are living in a very intolerant world, and for some, change is very scary. For many, it is frustrating when they are not able to benefit. And since no one hates Americans more than other Americans, many people exist in a scarcity mentality that makes it so if they are not suffering, they want everyone else to suffer. Like we used to say, eat the rich, and now what I am seeing is people don't want to eat the rich. They want to eat anyone they perceive is doing better than them, even if it's just that person is making 15 cents more than them, or that person looks a little bit more comfortable in life than them. So many people exist in this scarcity mentality that makes it so if they are suffering, they want everyone else to suffer. But the crazy part about this is they're not focusing their anger and frustration on the people who are creating this suffering. The billionaire class, they are the ones who are creating and upholding these systems that make the average American, the average person, that makes their lives challenging and makes it so they are not able to benefit and even dream or hope for a better tomorrow. The American dream is slipping out of their hands. It's slipping out of the reality for so many. And I think it's very interesting when I'm looking at the anger and the frustration and the conversation that is being driven around this anger, because a lot of people are waking up to a reality that they are only angry about now because it is affecting them. But for the longest time, the American dream didn't benefit a lot of people. The vast majority of Americans, that I want to say, if you were not a white person in America, if you were not somebody that came from some type of family wealth, if you were not somebody that was able to benefit from certain systems, from these institutions based in white supremacy that rewarded whiteness above all else, you were not often able to reach the American dream, or it was more challenging for you to reach the American dream. However, now that the American dream is slipping further and further and further away from the people who was created to actually benefit, now those people are waking up to, wait a minute, I'm angry about this and none of this is okay. And now they're angry and now they're frustrated. However, because they can't channel their anger towards the actual source of their frustration, who do they take it out on? their neighbors, the people around them in their community. And this displaced anger mixed in with disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda make these people think teleworking isn't real work. And if they're suffering, if they have to go to the office, then everybody else should have to go into the office, and everybody else should be suffering the way I'm suffering. And what does this lead to? People who are ready to vote against their own interests, people who are worried about the wrong things. They would rather take from their neighbor, the person next to them, to bring them down to their level of suffering instead of going to the source of their suffering or doing what it is that they can, even in a small, tangible way, such as voting to create a better tomorrow for themselves. And that's the sad part, this increasing anger towards your neighbors, your friends, your family members, people turning against one another. It's the most frustrating part, because these are the people in our communities, and real community, is the antidote. It is the only solution. Coming together and working towards a common goal is the only way we will start to see change. This nuclear family structure, capitalism, the way we work, this absence of community, all of this takes us further and further from our true nature, further and further away from how we were meant to live, further and further from each other, real connection, love, empathy, kindness. It is all of this lack of community, and this ever increasing push for capitalism, for money, for financial gain. It is what is contributing to so many of the ills we see these days. Depression, this increasing sense of just hopelessness, the loneliness epidemic, homelessness, chaos, and division. And the saddest part of all of this is it's all avoidable, or it's mostly avoidable through community. Yes, we absolutely need laws in place, and we need a government that is working towards the good of the average American. But if we're not going to get that from our government, we need to rely on ourselves. And like I've said it before, I've said it again. It seems like community working towards a collective common good is the answer to so many of the ills and the hardships we experience on a near daily basis in a capitalistic society that is frequently pushing and reinforcing individualism. But where has that gotten the majority of us? Individualism is not the way, and returning to in-office work is not going to solve any of the problems. It's just another band-aid and way in which we can participate in group suffering to keep the capitalism machine going. Drop down in the comments and let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace out.